The battlefield was never silent after the fighting stopped. Even when the cries of the dying faded, and the clash of steel ceased, something darker lingered, a heavy silence, thick with smoke, blood, and the metallic scent of death. Crows circled above the fields of France, waiting for the moment the English knights would finish their grim work. They had won, yes, but victory was only the beginning. For the English knights of the 14th century, what came after the battle was as important as the fight itself. And sometimes, far more terrible. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 had ended hours ago. The French knights lay scattered like broken dolls across the muddy hills. Their bright armor, once polished and proud, was now dented, slashed, and stained red. The English longbowmen, those rough men from the villages of Wales and England, stood among the bodies, staring at their handiwork. But it was the knights, those armored lords with lions and crosses painted on their shields, who now stepped forward to claim the real prize. Sir Geoffrey de Lacy, a veteran of the campaigns in Gascony, rode slowly through the corpses. His horse's hooves squelched in the mud and blood. Around him, his men dismounted, pulling knives from their belts. They moved like butchers in a market. "Find the nobles," Geoffrey ordered in a low, calm voice. "Check their hands for rings. Their necks for chains. Bring me any banners still clean enough to be recognized." There was no mercy here. Knights didn't just kill their enemies, they humiliated them. The French knights, stripped of their armor, were left naked for the crows. Some were decapitated, their heads piled in heaps as proof of English victory. Others were hung upside down from trees, their banners nailed above them, a silent warning to any who dared challenge the English crown again. To the modern mind, it sounds barbaric. But for these men, it was honor. The body of an enemy was not sacred, it was a trophy, a symbol, a message carved in flesh and steel. In the fading light, Sir Geoffrey stopped by the corpse of a young French knight. The man's face was pale beneath his shattered helmet, his blonde hair matted with blood. On his chest was an emblem, a golden fleur-de-lis, the mark of nobility. Geoffrey knelt, pried open the man's fingers, and found a silver ring engraved with a crest. He smiled grimly. "Good," he murmured. "His family will pay dearly to have this back." Looting the dead was a business. Rings, necklaces, daggers, even boots, nothing went to waste. The English knights stripped the bodies of everything valuable, not just for greed, but as part of the brutal code of war. To leave an enemy's corpse untouched was to leave gold lying on the ground. Yet, there was more to it than profit. For some knights, the treatment of bodies after battle carried a spiritual purpose. It was believed that denying a Christian burial to an enemy condemned his soul to wander in torment. To bury your comrades and leave the enemy to rot was seen as divine justice, a holy act in service of God and King. As the night deepened, the English lit fires. The smoke rose high, carrying with it the scent of burning flesh. Some bodies were cremated, not out of mercy, but to prevent disease. Others were quartered, their limbs sent as trophies to distant castles. Heads of high-ranking French knights were sometimes preserved in tar and displayed on city gates back in England. The people would gather to cheer, never knowing the names of the men whose faces stared lifelessly from the walls. Among the English camp, a strange ritual took place. After great victories, certain knights would drink wine from the helmets of the slain. It was an old tradition, half legend, half reality, meant to honor courage, or perhaps to mock it. Geoffrey de Lacy watched as a young knight filled his chalice from a dented helm, the wine running dark over the engraved crest of a fallen foe. "To victory," the young man said. "To the dead," Geoffrey replied softly, raising his own cup. The battlefield was their altar, and death their communion. But not all were so calm. Some men, driven mad by the horrors they had seen, laughed as they mutilated corpses. They cut off ears and fingers to wear as charms. One archer hung a skull from his belt, swearing it would bring him luck. The next morning, as the sun rose over the field, the English set about a final task, counting their dead and burying their own. Shallow graves were dug with swords and shields. Crosses made of broken spears marked the fallen. The knights prayed briefly, then mounted their horses again, leaving behind thousands of bodies for the crows and wolves. For days afterward, travelers would find the battlefield crawling with scavengers, men and beasts alike. Locals came with carts to strip the dead of armor and weapons. Bones were burned, melted down for iron, or used in strange medieval superstitions. And sometimes, amid the mud and rot, English knights returned to search for relics, a saint's symbol, a lost sword, or even a skull they claimed held power. To them, death was not the end. It was an opportunity. War had made monsters of men. But in their world, they were heroes. The years passed, but the tradition continued. From Crécy to Poitiers, from Agincourt to the Wars of the Roses, English knights carried their ruthless customs across Europe and even upon their own soil. Victory was never clean, it was soaked in blood, and what they did after the battle often left scars deeper than the wounds of war. In 1415, after the Battle of Agincourt, the English army once again stood victorious. King Henry V himself walked among the bodies, his boots sinking into the sodden earth. The field was a slaughterhouse, thousands of French lay dead, their armor glinting weakly in the grey light. "Burn them," Henry ordered. "Leave no corpse that might rise again." The English soldiers obeyed, dragging bodies into heaps, dousing them in oil, and setting them aflame. The smoke billowed high, black against the sky, and the stench was unbearable. But beneath that cruelty lay a cold calculation. Disease followed death, and plague could destroy an army faster than any sword. To burn the enemy was to protect the living. Still, the knights found ways to satisfy their darker impulses. One chronicler wrote of a night when a group of English knights, drunk on victory and wine, began a grim game. They took the heads of fallen French nobles, cleaned them as best they could, and set them on stakes in a circle. Then, with their torches blazing, they danced around them, shouting the names of the fallen in mockery. It was both celebration and curse. In another instance, after a victory in Scotland, English knights were said to have taken the bodies of enemy leaders and displayed them along the border, one limb nailed to each gate from Berwick to Carlisle. To them, it was a message of domination. To their enemies, it was terror carved into the land itself. Yet even within the brutality, there were moments of strange honor. Some English knights believed it dishonorable to let a worthy opponent rot. If an enemy had fought bravely, they might allow his burial or even send word to his family. Ransom for noble corpses became a custom. A fallen lord's body could be exchanged for gold, horses, or captured soldiers. In rare cases, the dead were treated with respect, washed, anointed, and wrapped before being sent home. But those gestures were exceptions, not the rule. By the 15th century, English knights had developed a more ritualized approach to post-battle practices. Skulls of great warriors were kept as relics. Some were carved into drinking cups, others sealed in shrines. The line between reverence and desecration blurred. The dead had become symbols, tools of fear and faith alike. At the Battle of Towton in 1461, the bloodiest in English history, the snow turned crimson. When the fighting ended, the victors had no time for burial. The spring thaw uncovered a nightmare of frozen corpses, their faces locked in eternal screams. Local peasants, fearing ghosts, built cairns of stone over the bodies. But the knights came later, taking bones and teeth as charms. They believed carrying a piece of the dead granted courage in the next fight. It was madness, yet it was their world. In private, some knights confessed nightmares. They dreamed of the faces of the men they had stripped and burned, of voices whispering through the night wind. Chroniclers wrote of camps haunted by the restless dead, of strange lights flickering over mass graves. Priests warned them that desecrating bodies brought curses. But war made men deaf to such warnings. Sir Geoffrey de Lacy, old now, grey and scarred, stood on another field many years later, watching his son among the new generation of English knights. The boy had just returned from skirmishes in Normandy, his armor gleaming, his sword still stained. Geoffrey saw him kneel before the corpse of a slain enemy and whisper a prayer. For the first time in years, the old knight smiled. Perhaps the cycle could end. But it did not. When the Wars of the Roses tore England apart, the English did to their own countrymen what they once did to the French and Scots. Heads of nobles were displayed on London Bridge. Bodies of fallen kings were stripped, mocked, and paraded through the streets. The knights had learned their lessons too well. Even centuries later, whispers remained. In the vaults of old castles, strange trophies were said to rest. Skulls with names carved into them, bones bound in silver, fragments of banners stained with ancient blood. Some families claimed to keep them as reminders of glory. Others locked them away, afraid of what they represented. History remembers the English knights as chivalrous, noble, and brave. But beneath the polished armor and courtly grace lay something darker, a world where death was both a duty and a fascination, where bodies were messages, and victory was measured not just in land or gold, but in what you did to those who fell before you. The fields they fought upon have long since turned green again. But dig deep enough, and the earth still whispers of the men who fought, died, and were never buried. And if you listen closely on quiet English nights, some say you can still hear the crows.